Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drilldown, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The co-host of the program, as always, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent, Peter. It's good to be with you. I'm very excited for today's program because this is a guest that has referenced your book and his book. I like when you authors just reference each other in your various literary tomes, and it's a really big deal for us to have him on the show.
Yeah, it is. We're really honored to have Newt Gingrich on the program. Of course, the former Speaker of the House wrote a terrific book last year called Defeating Big Government Socialism. And the thing I love about Newt is, having studied politics and been involved for 30 years, generally, Newt, there are leaders that fit into two categories. One, the group, they're big idea, big thinkers. And number two, they're the politicians that actually get something done. Very rarely do you find people that are big idea, really grasp the essence of the problem, but also actually know how to get things done in Washington. And you're somebody that has done that. So we wanted to bring you on today to talk about the current situation in Washington, the situation with the speaker, and the large question I think that's looming around a lot of people, which is, why is it that government does not seem to shrink? Why do we not seem to get many conservative victories? So, Newt, welcome to the program. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be with you, and I think that's one of the core questions of our survival.
It is. I mean, you look at the national debt, you look at the size and growth of government, it's not changing. There's a lot of frustration out there. I understand Speaker Johnson has a razor-thin majority. We don't have the Senate. We certainly don't have the White House. How would you rate how House Republicans are doing, given the massive problem that we face, and given that in a sense, the cards that they have been dealt? What could they be doing better? What do you think they're doing a good job of doing?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, there's a natural tension between wanting to get things solved and what the current system makes possible. So the people who are the most frustrated tend to step out of the game. They're not available. They won't help. They mostly criticize. And one of the great problems of the Freedom Caucus is that it spends about half its time tearing up its own side. It's like having a offensive tackle who tackles his own quarterback. And I think that that's a challenge. I think second, you can use the House better than the Senate as a tool if you're the speaker, because you have dramatically more power than anybody in the Senate. So Kevin McCarthy was beginning to do that before 8 members, 4% of his conference, decided to side with the Democrats to kick him out. But McCarthy had understood that the speaker has the ability to not schedule anything. And so ultimately, the president has to negotiate with the speaker to get anything done. And one of the keys, I think, for Mike Johnson is to recognize that he doesn't need to negotiate with Schumer. He doesn't need to negotiate with McConnell. He needs to negotiate with Biden and nobody else. And if he reaches an agreement with Biden, then it's Biden's problem to get it through the Senate, not Johnson's. But he shouldn't let himself get talked into some deal where he has to carry equal responsibility in a situation where he doesn't have equal power.
So why do you think that offensive tackles are now tackling their quarterbacks? And is that a unique phenomenon to when you were speaker, or is it because you think that they're going to get more attention and they somehow think they will grow their own careers by tackling their quarterback, to use your metaphor? I mean, what is it about today?
Well, I think both things. I mean, I ended my career having spent 20 years in the House, 16 years growing a majority, and 4 years as Speaker, the first Speaker in 40 years on the Republican side. But I ended my career because about 18 members decided that they didn't like the way I did things, and they were unhappy that we weren't getting enough done, although we had balanced the budget for 4 straight years. But that somehow that wasn't conservative enough. And so they just said flatly they wouldn't vote for me. I mean, I would not have had the ability, much like Kevin McCarthy. So I've watched this. The group of them began to drive Boehner out of the office for the same reason. The only person who survived was Hastert, and that was because he was serving with a Republican president and was a good Illinois politician who was endlessly ruthless. But other than that, I think what you have is we're a party of people who really want to change Washington. So the level of frustration is enormous because Washington is a city which has grown enormously powerful, which is capable of protecting itself, And Washington has to be seen not just as the bureaucracy or as the Democrats, but as the news media, the interest groups, the lobbyists. I mean, the total weight of the left is a huge, huge challenge. And I think one of the projects I'm working on, I describe as the crisis of 2026, which is to say, let's say that Trump continues the momentum he just got in Iowa, and let's say he becomes the nominee, and let's say that he wins a big election, and we pick up the Senate and we expand our margin in the House. The question then is, are you prepared for the next 2 years to take on the left, which is going to go crazy? I mean, they will see this as Armageddon. This, in their world, this will be literally life and death, and they will do anything they have to try to stop a new Trump administration. They don't want to make America great again. That's the exact opposite of where the left's head is. They want to drown America with illegal immigrants. They want to shrink America inside international organizations. They want to eliminate American history, and they want to raise a generation that despises its own country.
Yeah, and that seems to me an important part of this, Newt. I mean, you look back at Tip O'Neill when he was Speaker of the House, or Walter Mondale in the Senate or as a presidential candidate. I mean, they were sort of traditional liberals, not classical liberals, but traditional liberals. And there was certainly the left, but the intolerant left has really taken over the leadership of the Democratic Party. I mean, if you look at Nancy Pelosi, I mean, this is not somebody who wants to compromise, who wants to move slowly. So it seems to me that is part of the challenge. And under that pressure, the Republicans crack. And I think the other ingredient here is you have the rise of sort of celebrity figures within the Republican Party in the House that are, building up large followings on Twitter and on social media. And that becomes, I would argue, frankly, a motivation for some of them. To your point earlier, Newt, you're going to get a lot more attention.
But that's why I asked, because I feel like, are you getting more attention? Are you building your brand?
Yeah.
And do they see like Twitter followers equals political clout now?
Right.
Which is not something Mr. Gingrich had to deal with when he was Speaker.
And these individuals are not, I think, Newt, want you to jump in here, but these individuals are not necessarily looking at a career in the House where they want to climb up leadership. They're looking at branding themselves to becoming.
No, and remember, it's not just clout. These guys then use that notoriety to raise money online.
Yeah.
So you have people for whom picking fights inside their own party is a profitable venture.
Yeah.
And they are essentially entrepreneurs who have no interest in being a team member because they would have less notoriety, less money, and less following if they actually worked with their colleagues.
Yeah, it's a new form of crony capitalism in a way, a very destructive one.
Yeah.
And the analogy to me, I've used it before, is if you look at where conservatives are, we're essentially in Washington, D.C., they're in the Alamo, and the left is the Mexican army. And rather than having our guns pointed at the Mexican army, you've got guys fighting in the Alamo amongst themselves. That's kind of the reality that we're facing. So, Newt, what do you think the prospects are looking ahead, not just with Trump, but in the House? I mean, do you think the message is resonating, or do you think that there are mistakes being made there as well?
Well, I think, first of all, when you have huge tides of history, a lot of the stuff that those of us who love politics pay attention to just sort of disappears. It's sort of like when you have a tsunami, it washes away a lot of stuff that would not normally have been affected. I think that you have two different things going on. You have an absolutely remarkable multi-year campaign by Donald Trump, which now is in its ninth year, going back to when he first came down the escalator in 2015. So on the one front, you have somebody who has, crisscrossed the country, who has friends in every single state, and who has built a national system. Really, the first president to lose office and try methodically to come back since Grover Cleveland did it in 1892. Second, you have the combination of Biden's incompetence and the left's radicalism, which is both on a performance level and on a values level, driving people out of the Democratic Party at an amazing rate. And those two things, the strength of Trump and the increasing opposition to Biden, create the potential to have a very, very big election where you pick up a lot of seats in the House, clearly gain control of the Senate, you win the presidency. And the question is, can you design that campaign so that you have the support of the American people to actually impose the level of change that we need as a country if we're going to get back to governing ourselves? Because if what I described happens, and we end up with a Republican House, Senate, and White House, the left will literally just go nuts. I mean, it will be a very, very interesting couple of years as they do everything they can to undermine and repudiate the American people have chosen to lead the country.
To that point, I mean, Donald Trump has just had a historic win in Iowa, but that doesn't take away the legal challenges he faces on a number of fronts. In your mind, how legitimate are those charges, and where do you see those two kind of forces combined? Let's say that the political momentum continues to be with Donald Trump, but then legally he continues to not prevail. What happens then?
Well, I think that I think in the end the country is going to repudiate the legal attacks because they believe they're profoundly dishonest. I mean, the number of people who now believe that all of this is an abuse of power. So you don't have the rule of law, you have the rule of power, and of course you have bizarre things like the Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis turning out to have paid, I think, $600,000 in taxpayers' money to her boyfriend, who was then taking her on vacations. That may throw the entire case in Georgia out.
Yeah.
With all the different people who've been indicted and harassed and had to spend money, the whole thing may just collapse of its own. In New York, you have a bitterly anti-Trump judge and a bitterly anti-Trump Attorney General of New York who are trying to rig a fraud case in which not a single person, not one, has alleged that there was fraud. Every single person Trump dealt with said, he paid me back. What are you guys doing?
Right.
But this is so blatantly, stupidly political.
Yeah.
That again, I think it all blows up. And I think that goes probably to the appeals court in New York, and they probably send the case back and give it to a different judge and demand a jury trial, because historically, you cannot have a judge determining value. By definition, value is a matter of dispute, and therefore something to be settled with a jury, not with an individual personality. I think third, you have a radical judge in Washington presiding over a case brought by a radical attorney who had already been rebuked by the Supreme Court for lying and cheating in an earlier public integrity case, trying to develop a case in Washington, D.C., which voted 95% for Biden and 5% for Trump. You go to any average normal American and say, do you think if you're in an area where people voted 19-1 against you, that it's going to be pretty hard to get a fair trial? And they'll just think you're nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, I predict, will collapse of its own weight. There's a strong argument now being made by Reagan's Attorney General and two of Justice Scalia's law clerks that, in fact, Smith was appointed improperly and does not have the right to try the case. So that you could actually end up in the next 2 months with all this stuff just collapsing. And it's all like the Russia hoax.
Yeah.
Just remember, the Russia hoax, after years of investigation, after the FBI got involved, after the New York Times and the Washington Post won Pulitzer Prizes reporting falsehoods, it all just disintegrated because it turned out to be a gigantic lie.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're going to find almost all these things. You know, if Trump developed the concept of fake news, we ought to find some way of developing the concept of fake accusations.
Or fake law, something to that effect.
Fake law.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, Newt, you're highlighting a point that I think I've made before, which is that a lot of what the left is doing, they have so much power in Washington, D.C., but these actions reek of desperation, not of strength. They have the strength and the power, but I think they see the potential for what can be done if Trump is reelected. It's the hysteria, it's the fear that you talked about earlier, but it's also they know how effective it can be because he's mission oriented. And that's what I've said before, that, Donald Trump's superpower is that he has this remarkable ability to bring out the absolute worst in his opponents.
Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, they do the dumbest things. These are smart. They're the dumbest things. We're gonna try to get him off the ballot by taking him to court. So I think that is something that they're going to continue to do and continue to fail at. Newt, a broader issue when you look at Trump and the question of the Iowa caucuses and the primary is the future of conservatism. Now, I hear this a lot from people who don't like Trump. They don't like him for either personal reasons, but they'll also fall back in the mode of saying, well, he's not Ronald Reagan and he doesn't have Ronald Reagan's ideas. Of course, forgetting the fact that conservatism has changed with the times. When Reagan was president in 1980, the challenges he faced were quite different than the challenges we faced before. But as somebody who was of the Reagan era, that Reagan class that moved the country forward, looking at Trump, talk a little bit about how they're wrong. That I think really Reagan would be very comfortable, maybe with not all the personal things that Trump does, but the policy side and the philosophy side, I think Reagan would embrace a lot, if not everything, that Trump has pushed for.
Well, I try to tell people that I don't think Trump, in the William F. Buckley National Review sense, is a traditional conservative. I think Trump is the most effective anti-left politician of my lifetime, including Reagan. And the reason is Trump applies common sense and doesn't accept the language of the elites. And so when something's truly dumb, Trump says that's really dumb. If you regard controlling the border as conservative, Trump's for it. If you regard cutting taxes as conservative, Trump's for it. If you regard balancing the budget as conservative, Trump's for it. So I go down a list, and I don't, he is a populist conservative, but I actually think that's a good thing. I think the great strength of the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln or Theodore Roosevelt or William McKinley was it appealed to working people. It appealed to everyday folks. It wasn't isolated in country clubs and ivy towers. And I think that what Trump has done is really begin to rebuild, ironically, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt coalition by bringing in people of all backgrounds. He's now doing particularly well with Latinos. He's doing better and better with Asian Americans. He is starting to penetrate, particularly with African American males. He's doing very, very well with working blue-collar whites, and you can see it in Iowa. I mean, where did Nikki Haley have any hope at all? University of Iowa, Iowa State. As long as there were college professors, and as long as it was a place where you had lots and lots of people who had gone to school long enough to be truly stupid, then they did fine. The minute you got out of those counties, Trump was winning by huge margins, and that's because everyday common sense people understand that a great deal of what Washington says is just plain baloney and not true and not productive.
It's crazy to think that a populist like Donald Trump, who is expanding his appeal to new demographics, can be so divisive and can also then turn off the people to the extent that it is. And that's actually what I wanted to ask you about, Mr. Gingrich. I remember a time when, after you became speaker, you had a celebrity from Saturday Night Live, Chris Farley, comes to Washington, D.C. and plays you in the halls of Congress. And it's a really funny thing, and you were incredibly good-natured about it. And it was this fun, bipartisan sort of celebration of the merger of politics and culture. It's just fun.
Well, now they know there are two of you. That's how you get so much work done. But, Mr. Speaker, I've been assigned a very important duty, administrating to you a new speaker's oath. So if you please put your hand on the Diet Coke and repeat after me. I, Newt Gingrich.
I, Newt Gingrich.
Do solemnly promise to continue to be a good speaker.
Do solemnly promise to continue to be a good speaker.
I promise to help the American people.
I promise to help the American people.
I promise to smile when people call me landslide.
I promise to smile when people call me landslide.
I promise not to kill Big Bird.
I promise not to kill Big Bird.
I promise that my book will be way less boring than Al Gore's book.
absolutely promise that my book will be way less boring than Al Gore's book.
And finally, most important of all, I promise to go see Tommy Boy, new hit movie starring Chris Farley. Thanks a lot, sir.
But that could never happen today. You would never have an elite celebrity, I think, come and celebrate and participate in anything with a conservative politician. And I guess I just wonder if you think about that and why you think that moment in our history seems to have passed us by. Do you think that's Donald Trump, or do you think there's just other forces? Do you think culture follows the lead of, if our politicians are unwilling to compromise, right, has culture followed suit?
I mean, first of all, Chris Farley, I suspect, was a Republican. So he was willing to take the risk. It's on YouTube. It's a great segment.
It is.
And John Boehner arranged it. I had no idea it was going to happen. And all of a sudden, in comes the new speaker, Chris Farley. He does a great job, and everybody had fun. I think Theodore White captured this in The Making of the President in 1972, when he's trying to describe why McGovern is now trapped on the hard left. And he has a sentence where he says that the liberal ideology had hardened into a liberal theology, and it was no longer negotiable. And you've now had that metastasized since 1972. So you've had 50 years of an increasingly hard line, increasingly anti-American, increasingly woke system, which actually invents fantasies. I think that we don't really appreciate how much the left now lives in an alternative universe. I tell people that the left basically, and the reason they can't deal with violence, whether it's Hamas's attack on October 7th or the Russian attack against Putin, or against Ukraine, or violence in our big cities, is that good liberals have all seen The Lion King and thought it was a documentary. And so, they actually think that lions and zebras sing and dance together, and that when you say to them, lions do actually eat zebras, they go, no. Didn't you see the movie? Don't you understand? And that's why you end up with this. I mean, I just tweeted today. I mean, you now have Biden not only doesn't have the courage to stand up to Iran, apparently he's not going to stand up to his own White House staff, who are going to go out and demonstrate against his policy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Now, and I agree with Speaker Johnson, who said every federal employee who goes out to demonstrate should be fired.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fundamental violation of the whole concept of a civil service.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to do what the elected president of the United States has asked them to do, their answer is to resign. It's perfectly reasonable to resign, but not to say, I'm going to go outside for a couple of hours, yell about how bad you are, and then come back into my job. It shouldn't be, but it tells you the stunning level of weakness about dealing with things on the left, unless, of course, you're a conservative, in which case they hate you and they smear you and they try to destroy you.
Yeah, and to that point, the last area we wanted to touch on, of course, was China. And to your point, I had hopes early on, as we started seeing the rise of the China threat in the last decade, that you would see a bipartisan consensus develop. And you kind of see it at some level about alliances and a few trade policies. But I don't see the Democrats any more willing to entertain the notion that China is a threat, that China views itself as our adversary, maybe even our enemy, that their way of life is antithetical to ours. So Newt, help me out. Any hope for a bipartisan consensus on really strong, firm action as it relates to China?
I think that there's a possibility over time. But again, if you start with Jeane Kirkpatrick's famous 1984 convention speech, where she described the San Francisco Democrats as blame America first. And again, this is 1984, so it's a good time ago. And you think about it, there are a lot of left-wing people who actually identify more with China than with the United States.
Right. Yeah.
And so, they're sympathetic. After all, if the Chinese, if Xi Jinping feels like he has to occupy Taiwan, who are we to say no?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same psychology which leads them to side with Hamas and Hezbollah against Israel. Because Israel's greatest sin on the left is that it's pro-American. I mean, if Israel was anti-American, they'd feel more comfortable trying to help the Israelis. So I think you have this deep revulsion, and I think it's hard to overstate that in probably 30 or 40% of the Democratic Party now, there is an automatic assumption that the United States is wrong and whichever country you're talking about is right.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate, and I think that's true, Newt. I know that we've talked a lot about threats and challenges that we face in America today, and it can be kind of gloomy, but I know that you are inherently an optimist, as I am. So we appreciate you very much making the time and joining us here to talk about these wide variety of issues. I encourage everybody to pick up Defeating Big Government Socialism. It came out last year, but very, very relevant to the debates and the challenges that we face today. Eric, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what I love is that Newt takes a look at what we focus on here at the Government Accountability Institute, and it's the merger of big business and big government. Big government is good for big business, and big business is the reason why government continues to grow. And we try to expose the people that have profited off of it with what we do. And I think, Mr. Gingrich done an excellent job of continuing to talk about that. So we appreciate the time. We actually did a whole hour special about how wealthy Washington, D.C. has become. And so you're absolutely right. The power and the weight of D.C., I think, dominates in a way that people don't appreciate. So we appreciate you bringing it up.
Yes. Well, we thank you, Newt, for joining us, and we thank you, the audience, for always taking the time to listen to this program. You can find out more about the work that we're doing at thedrilldown.com, and you can find the podcast wherever fine podcasts are located. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.